Before watching this tutorial, I would encourage you to go to our channel on YouTube and open the playlists, go to the JCB compiler explained the code, and watch the last two. Well, it may not be the last two when you watch, uh, but the dependency injection simplified in the introduction to superpowers. Watch those two tutorials first, as they form a foundation upon which we want to extend in this tutorial that we are about to do now. So having now pulled in classes into our JCB instance through the SPK key implementation as explained previously, we now have a set of classes that I can actually use to demonstrate some of the next things that you might want to understand about your own repositories and setting up code in your own repositories as needed. So I'm gonna treat this classes as if it's something that you could have written yourself. So that's usually what happens in JCB, the powers area. You start building code, you set up your service providers, you link it to a factory, you kind of create your entry point, you start using it in your extensions, and then you start a new project and you want to use that code in the new project as well. There used to be a way that you could link it to a component, export a component, and import a component into the other JCB, and by that means distribute the code to your other instances. And although that still works, it is kind of tedious. Whereas this approach is more in sync with how we usually would manage code, and that is with a repository. Not exactly, but kind of, because we have a special repository. This repository is automatically generated by JCB, and you basically are able to then push the code from that folders that JCB will generate into a repository. And this is kind of what I want to demonstrate in this tutorial. So to do that, there are a few layers that you need to kind of get in place. First of all, you need to decide where is your repository going to live. That's talking about in the cloud. JCB was built to ensure freedom. And so with that, it means that we haven't linked you hard to our own infrastructure. You're actually able to use another Git instance, a Git instance, and link JCB to that instance. If you do that, like I've explained before, you'll have to make sure that you fork our core, or what we would call main superpowers. Because JCB, as we start extending it towards the future, will more and more push its functionalities and its behavior into this aspect of its infrastructure, so that we can easily distribute code without the actual zip package, and that when you use certain features in your extension, JCB would only load those if you need them, instead of having an overloaded system which maybe you'll need things. We are going to be kind of zooming in to only pull code into your project that you're actually planning to use. And so that means our core superpower foundation, which currently is slim, there's not much code in it yet, will actually grow. In fact, all templates and future implementations are going to move into that arena. Having said all that, I want to start showing you some of what that would look like practically. Okay, so opening our Git system, this is kind of what you should see. You should see git.vdm.dev, and it is the home page or the front page. And you're able to click on, going to the component builder repository. You could even click around and look at some of the other public repositories. And here is the core repository, the Joomla superpowers. This is where eventually all the baseline classes that would be necessary for JCB to function will live eventually. And it is from this repository that all other JCB instances will be pulling their code. You'll see that there is 2 branches, and that the development branch is constantly updated automatically as I'm working. And so I will only merge the development branch with the master branch when I know the build that was pushed is actually stable. And so your master branch will become our stable branch. And we're not going to have versioning here. We are dealing with versioning actually at the level of the class itself. So that if we're going to swap out the array helper class, we're just going to swap out that one version for this one. And it's basically a granular management of versioning instead of a packaging approach of fine-tuning it. We're going to try and deal with it on a lower class level. Now, having said that, we might change our strategy, but at this outset, we're trying to solve a lot of problems by doing things a little slightly different in how we're coupling classes together. Instead of having things kind of a repository for this type of thing, a repository of this, we are actually bundling it in a very different way that is basically making JCB itself the custodian or the manager that will eventually orchestrate all this architecture and bring all these things together. So as you can see, looking at the actual folders of a superpower repository, it's kind of daunting, right? You can't really say what is what unless of course you go through the index here, you're able to find things. And if you want to see all the classes within a specific namespace, this has all been done. And around our sort of display and layout of the superpower classes itself, you're always welcome to give ideas and suggestions, recognizing that we have the power of, if we look here at the code, we have the power to generate the UML directly from within JCB. So JCB is actually generating this UML for you. You're not doing anything to make that work. And so we could improve the UML, we could tweak it, and if we do so, it will improve for everyone. And the whole purpose of what I've done is to make things kind of simple and easy to understand, instead of kind of hierarchy, kind of hiding things in folders and stuff. I try to do it this way, and thinking that maybe this would be an easier way to get a quick overview of things based on namespacing instead of folder structures. We know that eventually when JCB uses this in your component, it does in fact fall back upon the old architecture of folder structures and so forth. But in the distribution of superpowers, we are taking this approach because it's fast to search. And this is the key aspect. The superpower JSON file, which is in the root of the directory, is the actual file that we are using to search for superpowers. So whenever we go back to your instance and we go to the options and global settings, superpower, every one of the instances that you add here will become part of the places where JCB will search for things if it's not already in your database. So once it's in your database, JCB won't go searching for it. So if you, there are other ways to reset your database data through those buttons that we are not yet finished with, but in a powers area there is a set of buttons which I think I've touched on in previous tutorial. These buttons, init, sync, and reset, each of those have their specific roles. In fact, when you look at the documentation here, you see that we actually do talk about the switches. No, wait, not the switches. Events, here they are. So there's a synchronizing event, an init event, and a reset event. And then there's the compiler event. The compiler event is the only one that is currently already finished, and what I've already demonstrated in previous tutorials. Whereas the sync, init, and reset events, these are the buttons, and they will eventually be implemented so that those behaviors explained there would become available to you and to use. So I've tried to kind of create a new language, discover a sort of explanatory language, like here, that there is the powers are, and then explains to you some of that, and then the layers, meaning the places where the powers can be found, the database, repository, the core, or own, or local. Now, the repository aspect of this is basically, which we talked about, the Git instance, the Git instance, where the code is globally in the cloud maintained. The core is the one that I've shown you already, this superpowers. This is the core, okay? So whenever you see the word core here, we are talking about that repository. And I mean, I put the URL here so that it become more obvious exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if, like I said, you got your own repository, this core needs to be forked and kept in sync. So you need to mirror it. Now, when you have a Git instance, a Git instance, there is an easy way to do a mirroring link between two instances of Git, and just follow documentation to get that all sorted. Then you have your own superpowers. Now, if you have superpowers that are kind of private, then you have the option to actually make it private in our instance of Git. But having done that, you're going to have to make sure that you've got your VDM access token set. Okay, this will be then necessary because, and obviously this token should belong to a user that actually has read and write access, not write actually, but definitely read access, because the write we're still not writing from within JCB to the Git instance, the Git, because we want to keep it kind of simple, and the Git workflow itself on the file system is simple enough. And I have written a little bit of a script which I'll introduce you to in a moment that kind of helps you maintain continuity, so you don't need to keep on pushing things every day. Kind of does that for you. So the same automation that I'm using to keep our superpower instances up to date, I'm actually going to share with you, and you're able to use the same. Obviously, if you're on a Linux Ubuntu system. If you're on another type of operating system, you'll have to test whether these bash scripts actually work on that system, and make whatever suggestions within that issue of the issue tracker of that repository. And I'll be willing to work with you and try and make it work. But there is a measure of you have to figure it out yourself as well. So if you've got a repository that's basically not available to the public, then you need that API key inserted, because then a Git, if it's going to search that repository, it needs access to it, and that's why the key is needed. If you're using your own system, you're going to have to add that system's key here. And the reason why there are two different keys is because we're also using this this key to get updates for JCB itself, and in other functionalities that we'll introduce as time goes on. So we didn't want to use the same key. So we actually provide an extra field if you're using your own Git system, that you would add your token here. Okay, so that's the first aspect that's kind of necessary. Now the second aspect, which I'll demonstrate then here today for you, is where you are going to create your own repository. So you first put there Joomla Git, and you pulled in all that code. Now that the code is here, you want to create your own version of it, and so you can change this to say Llewellyn. You could leave that to be Git, because you could have a repository with the same name on top of your organization. Now here we're going to have to set a local path. And what this local path is basically going to be used for is that every time we compile the component to which these classes are linked to, JCB is going to build the repository for where all those classes are linked. So it's going to put that code and those folders in that location. So if you're using Octium to deploy your Joomla instance, then you are in a virtual environment. And to link the folder from within that virtual environment to your parent system is not that difficult. I'm going to show that to you briefly. Not going to spend much time on that because some of you may be using a very different kind of system. But at least I want you to understand exactly what that's all about. So here we are in Octium. I'm going to go and basically edit available container, and we're working on this one. Say OK. And once we are in the view of that file, you'll see that I added here at the bottom, I added a folder path. And that folder path is simply targeting my Git path on my parent system. And it's creating a folder which is kind of identifiable for me to know, okay, this is the JCB builder power path. And then within the container, I'm using a normal var /power, which is a simple folder path, which then will be created for me inside of the virtual container. Now, that's just on that connection. If you're on another system, you kind of want to just know the full path to the place where you want the powers placed. And it needs to be a place to which the owner, which is executing the PHP script, has access to write to that area. Okay, that should cover that. So in my case, there it is, var www. Again /power. That's going to be enough for me, and I'm going to just put the word git, Llewellyn and Gitty as the path. Now you could add multiple repositories, and each of these repositories that you're going to add here, you're going to now be able to link classes from within the power area to them. So you could add multiple repositories, and you could even link classes to more than one repository. It depends on you how you want to structure and how you want to store code. In the end, you should think about sharing it amongst projects. You must think about maybe some code that you write is exclusive to a client. So having a private repository specifically for that client might be ideal. So although it's shared within other code, you can exclude it from the bulk and put it in its own exclusive repository. And all this kind of functionality is what you would basically be able to achieve with this approach. And so we're going to save this. If we now open any of these repositories and we go to the Superpower tab, you'll see now that there is this approve and not approved basically radio switch. And this approved option opens to you all the approved paths. Now the approved paths, as you can see, it includes the core Joomla /superpowers, and it also now includes Llewellyn /Gitty. Now, if you were to click on both of these, I want to just demonstrate what will happen. It will still function as you might expect. Now, yes, as you can see, it's quite tedious. You have to go through them manually doing each one of these classes. And if you've got as many as I do, which is over 100, it takes a long time. But it doesn't usually go like that, right? Yes, in the initial start out now, it's kind of tedious, and I could have probably sped this up a little, but I didn't have time to do that as yet. So for now, this is how it's done. Now, the reality is, I'm not going to do all of that now. I want to just give you a quick idea of what is possible. So I've linked a few classes, and I go to the compiler. I'm going to clear this out, and I'm going to compile this. Now there's some advanced overriding feature here. If you don't have the superpowers activated and you want to activate it only now and then you can do that here, override it. And if you have the local power path set up, then it will grab it. Otherwise, it will be blank and you need to fill in something manually. But you could also block it from actually updating the powers. So this functionality is already there. And yeah, I'm not sure if it should stay there or we should move it back here to this side. But we'll keep an eye on that. The point is we've got ours activated, so we don't need that. And now we compile. Now at this point, JCB is writing to that folder. Okay, we still have that class missing. Let's see. Okay, I need to create this folder. Just hold on. It needs to, I did not restart the container, and so it does not yet have that folder. So let me quickly do that. I can take you along. I don't mind you seeing how I do that. So edit available container. I first need to, wrong. Not this one, that one. I just want to get and copy this because I don't like typing. So I'm gonna go, yeah, let's copy that. And then go out here, don't rebuild this, edit available, do the test. There it is. Okay, so we want to add it here. Except that we want to change this to test. Okay. And then quickly redeploy that. And that should be it. Okay. Now I also want to make sure that it gets this class, or in our previous tutorial we explained that it was not part of the previous code base of Gitty, but I have since then made the change, but I haven't merged it into the master branch. So I'll be doing that offsite quickly and then recompile. Okay, so I did the update, and the way I did it is I added that class to the superpowers because it's now being used by more than one area of JCB. And in that case, everything that becomes necessary for multiple superpowers, I basically start moving that to our central hub. Okay, that being said, we're gonna be able to recompile now and have it build our repository as expected. Okay, so let's look at what it has done. So here we are in my parent systems folders, basically having a Git folder, and there's the path test builder power, and we see that there is a Joomla folder, and inside of it superpowers. Now if I open that up, and we'll see that it has built a superpowers for us. Now opening that, let's say open with editor, we basically see that it's the superpower with the few classes we selected, with their UMLs, everything auto-generated, and inside of them is the classes inside of their respective folders. And here is our search array for future use. Now the reality is we have it now here, and it is basically not linked to a remote repository, but you can browse into this source folder and you can actually init, connect it to a repository with Git. I'm not going to spend much time on how to set up Git. Some of you may be using GUI interfaces to manage your Git repositories, and in that case you don't need my help anyway. But those of you who wants to learn how to use Git in the command line, it's really not that hard. Git is one of the most critical tools in my toolbox, and I use it every day, all the time. And so I would demonstrate how to connect your repository to Gitty, but very sort of running over a lot of technical issues I'm not going to explain. And so following me, you might not necessarily get it to work just out of the box. but I'll have to do a separate tutorial that goes into the detail of that. Otherwise, this one will get too long, and it's already long. Okay, so we're not going to deal with this one. We're going to go back and see there's a Llewellyn and a Gitty. So this is the one that is now linked to my personal profile on Gitty. So I'm going to link this one to that personal profile. Okay, let's look at that. There's obviously more than one way to do this. The one way would be if you were to have linked all those Git files and you've connected them all to that Git repository. You could just as well come here and basically fork the Gitty repository. So you could say fork and then select your profile and then decide to make it private or whatever, and then click fork. So that's one way to get quickly the repository moved over to your profile. The other way would be to say new repository. And when you do new repository, you could then again select your profile. And then here I would say Gitty. Okay, so that's the make it private. And most of these can be left unchanged, and then create repository. This will basically create this kind of setup. Now, the rest of the instructions are quite clear, and this is basically what you need to do to get that repository linked. And if you don't know which of these to use, it's all about having SSH keys set up, having it linked to your profile. Gitty has a very powerful settings area where you can go and add your SSH keys, add your GPG key, verify it, all of that. There's a lot of documentation about that online. If you don't know, you could research and do that. Okay, so assuming that all that is done, we're going to go here and say open terminal, and then we are basically inside our folders where the Gitty classes are. And the first one would be git init, which basically lets the repository know that, well, creates the repository of Git. Then we're going to do git add and just dot, because we want to just add all of the files. Then we're going to say git commit am first commit, which is basically what you could say when you do your first commit. Then you might need to, if you have secured your installation of how your Git is managed, you may need to put that key in. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into the depths of that. I'm just going to say that my GPG key needs to be added here quickly. Hold on. Okay, so now I've got my code signed and committed and everything. As I say git log, I should see that that first commit was successful, and now I can actually connect it to my repository by adding this command here, and that connects it to this repository. And then to do the initial connection of pushing the files to the repository, and at this point this folder is now linked to your repository on the Gitty system. If I click on this again, we'll see there's the commit I just made, and these are the few classes that we've connected. Obviously we just selected some random classes to give you the idea of what it will do, and if we were to click on any of these classes, it already has got the UML for it. So it is kind of interesting how all of this is done for you automatically. And here's the code that it built, and here is the code that it will use to import, and here is the settings, and in the settings it will show you that it extends this class, and so it will make sure to search for that class and to make it available when you link it. Okay, so I'm not gonna go into too much more about this. the point is I've now shown you the first process of basically compile the component. It has it create folders on your desktop, and then going with Gitty and connecting that folder with your repository. The next step is to automate this. And for that, if you go to our Octolio repository, I have written a bash script called JCB Power Updater. Now the JCB Power Updater is an easy way to actually automate your whole update process. So the installation is quite simple. You could just use this. Obviously, if you don't, you could just clone the repository or just download this file and put it within your path so that it can execute. And once you have set that up, there is a next step in which you can make it part of a system CTL kind of automated process. I have not documented it here. I thought I did, but it seems like I didn't. Okay, I will see if I can add that documentation here as well, so that you can add it to basically what is the more sophisticated type of cron jobs in Ubuntu. So Ubuntu has the CTL.service feature which you can set up, and then you have the same service name.timer in which you can manage the incremental updating of that script. And so that's what is possible. And so this is the initial setup. It needs to be passed the file path so that it knows where the specific directory containing the repositories. You need to pass it that -d to actually make it push the code automatically. And you also need to, if it's not the same URL, this is the default, then you need to pass that as well. The code is here, you could look at it. It's what I'm using to automatically update all my repositories that are power driven. And it's kind of intuitive. You will be able to follow what we did here quite easily. Okay, so having said that, if you want to still do it manually, that's also fine. At this stage, that's how you take powers that you've developed, write them to a local folder, and then once you're ready, either automate the process of pushing it to your remote repository through this script, or basically manually pushing it out once you're ready. And so this is getting your repository into the cloud. Once you've got it here, you would now be able to make use of the feature that we demonstrated earlier, where you can link it into other projects using this superpower key. Well, that was a mouthful. I'm sure we could have done much more detail and being more precise in every aspect, but to try and cover so much ground in such a short time is difficult. So start talking back to me, reach out, open issues, tell me what you think. If you agree that we should push towards complete automation, that it even pushes the code for us automatically and without the Git part involved, then let's hear that. But this is where we are now. This is how you couple or actually create your own repositories on Gitty, and then are able to link it into your system. I hope it makes more sense now than just reading the documentation. I'll be waiting for your feedback, and if needed, make another tutorial. So until next time, take care. Goodbye.